The news media doesn't just cover society, we're also part of it, for better or worse. So it's no wonder the tumult of 2020 also rocked journalists out in the field and also inside the newsroom. Adam has more.
When the New York Times ran this op-ed by Senator Tom Cotton calling for a military crackdown on Black Lives Matter protests, plenty of people were aghast, including Times employees.
Many of them are tweeting, quote, "Running this puts Black New York Times staffers in danger."
That controversy led to the exits of opinion editor James Bennett and columnist Barry Weiss, who became a conservative hero after claiming that while Twitter is not on the masthead of the New York Times, Twitter has become its ultimate editor.
Her harsh words speak to a media culture far beyond the Times and should concern anyone who cares about free expression in journalism.
That concern isn't just on the right. In Harper's, a host of big names warned that open debate is being dangerously stifled by some on the left. And Vox co-founder Matt Iglesias quit that site because he felt oppressed by progressive orthodoxy.
You have a lot of people, young people, college graduates, living in a couple big cities, a lot of very left-wing ideas sort of being mainstreamed.
But some of those ideas are worth pondering, like journalist Wesley Lowery's argument that white perspectives in the newsroom pass for objective, while black perspectives get labeled biased.
If you have newsrooms that are constructed around primarily one type of person, they are going to recoil, or they have the potential to recoil from things that challenge their kind of normative view.
Case in point, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette barred reporter Alexis Johnson from covering Black Lives Matter after she complained of a double standard in how those protests are viewed.
I really did take it personal. I argued, I pushed back.
As we debated how to do our jobs, journalists of all stripes faced harassment and violence, often at the hands of law enforcement.
You heard us telling them that we were media, but they don't care.
Maybe because the outgoing president branded us the enemy of the people, a slur that will still be here after he is long gone.
You know, I don't know if you agree with me, but I think the media was on the cusp of this kind of change anyway, and certainly the murder of George Floyd back in May was the catalyst that got the ball rolling in terms of big changes in newsrooms. I mean, I have to point out the Boston Globe has made a fundamental change in the way it covers the news. And, you know, black people are mainstreamed on the front page of that newspaper every day, and some of their columnists are front page on weekends and other days as well. They have changed the way they do the news business.
I agree that we were primed for a change. I think in large part because the presidency of Donald Trump forced us to repeatedly say, here is the person running the country saying something that's untrue. You do that enough times, it starts to change the way you think. I would also say, like John, I am an alum of the late Boston Phoenix, and I've always had a different take on the ideal of objectivity that a lot of mainstream journalists ascribe to. I think pure objectivity is sort of impossible. What you hope for, what you aspire to, is telling the truth and interrogating all points of view equally rigorously, but not providing 6 ounces from one side, 6 ounces from another. And I think it's terrific that we are engaged in the midst of this slow motion recognition that objectivity is not necessarily all it's cracked up to be. I hope it continues in the year to come.
Well, a reminder that I do work for the Globe, and I agree that they've really made a lot of changes, especially this year, in how they cover things, in what they cover, and how they present the news. Editors and writers have spent a lot of time this year looking back over their previously published stories, measuring how many sources were used, who those sources were, how many people of color were interviewed, what stories featured them, and in what contexts. There's a tendency in the media overall, writ large, to focus on people of color in a positive way only in terms of sports. Mm-hmm. And that's something that it's high time there was a change. I think that being aware of our biases is the first step towards being able to report on something objectively. I don't think that there's a such thing as complete lack of bias. And I think that if a black person is considered unobjective in reporting on Black Lives Matter because they have a stake in the outcome, so are white people.
Yeah, of course.
And I think people are finally coming to understand that. This is a great example, and something Callie mentioned earlier about covering communities of color during COVID. As newsrooms change and start to look more like the communities they serve, hopefully these stories will become the norm instead of the exception.
communities does your favorite media outlet serve? That's a key question going forward. In a lot of these cases, at least with regard to commercial media, you're seeing media organizations respond to the marketplace. Now, the Globe is doing more coverage of Black issues, giving more Black people voice. And yet, for many years, the bulk of their revenue has really come from a suburban readership. You wonder how that tension is going to play out over time. But as far as seeing more Black faces, hearing more Black voices in the media, it's like the statue of Saddam Hussein being pulled down, that famous video. This is long, long overdue. It's like the media, among the stodgiest, whitest institutions there is, big media, and in many cases local media as well, is finally like waking up like Rip Van Winkle to the reality of what America is like today. And I see no negatives to it at all. I don't like cancel culture. No. I don't think anyone in their right mind does. But that's not what this is. This is improved culture.
Well, I hope this is something that is changing for real. I think that those conversations that have happened in some newsrooms certainly needs to happen. Let me first give a shout out to Alexis Johnson, who was that reporter in Pittsburgh who was told that she was biased in the way that she covered the Black Lives Matter protests. She has a new job at Vice News where they don't think she was biased in covering it. So there is something to be said about that. The voices in the newsroom, the voices of persons of color have been there, but they often are not listened to. I think about little examples right now that we could do better at. For example, as much coverage as we've given restaurants going out of business, and we need to give them plenty of coverage. The restaurants that were hit hardest that don't get a lot of attention are those in Chinatown, because that bias about the virus is still ongoing. So there are many places where we can learn a lot from the people who are in the newsrooms if they're there, and if they're not there, please, God, please diversify the ranks. I'm glad to see some of this finally happening. I hope it's a permanent change. I'll just have to wait and see.
Well, it's been permanent so far on the pages of the Boston Globe anyway, and I think the New York Times to an extent, but I agree with whoever made the point about the cancel culture, John. I mean, opposing points of view still need to be heard, regardless of whether you like them or not.